Hi everybody, welcome back to those of you who are coming back, and welcome to those of you who are coming for the first time. Welcome also to the people on Zoom. This is our third panel of the day. This panel is entitled Leading and Working Across Disciplines. We have absolutely the best people here to talk about leading and working across disciplines. First, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jen Heemstra, who is Chair and Professor of Chemistry and the Charles Allen Thomas Professor of Chemistry. I just want to introduce for the first time Lindy Elkins-Tanton, who is a Foundation and Regents Professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration at ASU, soon to be at the University UC Berkeley. She's the Vice President of the ASU Interplanetary Initiative, the Principal Investigator of the Psyche, right, first time mission. Selected in 2017 as the 14th in NASA's Discovery Program. In 2018, she became a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and in 2021, she was elected to the National Academy of Sciences. All this to say, I'm giving very tinily succinct versions of our panelists' really amazing bios, and I'm going to reintroduce Jeffrey. Jeffrey Cohen is the Dean of Humanities in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and Foundation Professor of English at ASU, a scholar of English. He is widely published in medieval studies, monster theory, environmental humanities. Jeffrey is rightly renowned for his for the growth of humanities majors, explosive growth of humanities majors at ASU, where they now have over 4,000. But most relevant for the purpose of our conversation today are Jeffrey and Lindy's co-authored book, Earth, which was published in 2019 by Bloomsbury as part of the Object Lesson series, and we're very lucky to have one of the very amazing series editors here, Chris Shaberg, with us. So yeah, take it away. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much to both of you for being here. And
so fun.
Good. I think we're going to have a really fun discussion. And so I wanted to kind of kick off, actually, where Stephanie left off, which is thinking about how to have successful collaborations across disciplines, because I know around this place and probably any university that's done a strategic plan in the last 5 to 10 years, right? You know, transdisciplinary collaboration or some form of that thought or phrase or wording is part of the university's strategic plan. It's something that's just really popular on our campuses and in academia. And I was curious, what things have you seen from your own work together or the work of others as examples that have gone really well and allowed these collaborations to form and have life and be successful? And then are there things you've seen that have worked, less well that you would say we should avoid doing?
Great question.
Do you want
You go first.
I guess I have two answers to this, and I'm very curious to see if people want to chat more about these things later, see if it resonates. I would just say, first of all, I feel like I've always assumed that every discipline had an awful lot more in common than difference, because it's all just trying to apprehend our world in our own way. And one thing that Jeffrey and I have had a lot of fun discovering since we first did a thing like this together in 2012 was that a lot that stands between ourselves and a fruitful communication is simply jargon and sentence structure. And so one of the things that I noticed right away, my big brother is an art historian at the Art Institute of Chicago, so we've had this conversation. In my field, I try to write a sentence that means exactly one thing. And a lot of times in humanists, we're trying to make a whole spectrum of meaning. And so
That's generous.
I mean it in a totally good way. So, and then the other thing I was going to say is, if you don't mind my adding a second point, is that in caricature, I view academia as a whole series of heroes standing on their own disciplinary mountaintops and fighting when their real estate in the valley intersects. And that's a model that all of us have been successful at, and it has to do with being an A+ personality type and being willing to stand up and speak with assurance. And what I've really learned, especially through the Psyche mission, I've done a bunch of big collaborations, but this is by far certainly the biggest collaboration in my life. It's $1 billion project, and we've had 3,000 people on the team. Right now our team's 250 across about 15 organizations. I've been working on this since 2011. one of the things that's been really clear to me is that the most fruitful meetings, which is where the most important things happen, are ones where every person is listened to regardless of their perceived status, because they're in the room, because their disciplinary knowledge is needed. And so I took that lesson and completely reformed my classroom practice with it. And also in the Interplanetary Initiative, our goal is to be interdisciplinary and do projects having to do with human space futures that go across the whole university, so it's held up at the provost and VPR level. And so in the last 9 years, what we've done is invent a new way to put together interdisciplinary teams, which starts with brainstorming the biggest questions that need to be answered. So not like my favorite question, that's my next mountain question, or Jeffrey's one, but a question that's beyond either of us to answer on our own. And then we vote on those questions, and then we volunteer into teams. Then we determine which disciplines are missing, and then we choose a leader, not till then. And then we do this in one day. We've done it many times at ASU, and now I'm doing it at different places around the country. I just did it at the Air Force Academy. And then they have 2 weeks to come back with a budget, and then we put them under professional project management. So all these things are antithetical to the traditional university model. And our seed funding is usually just $5,000 or sometimes $10,000, which can be a lot of money, but in today's, probably those days are over, but in the past we could get seed funding like that. And we're running about a 6 times return on investment with outside funding. And so that's been my lesson in trying to create interdisciplinary teams. And I think you are amazing at that, so I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
So I say it's a great pleasure to be here with Lindy. Lindy and I have been friends for a very long time. We were neighbors in Washington, D.C. Lindy moved to ASU. We were working on the book on Earth at Chris's invitation.
Chris did all of this.
Chris really helped us to crystallize a mode of working together that we really enjoyed. And part of the stakes of that book, so I know it's hard to think back to that long ago, the book was 2017.
You just said that.
I said 2019.
2019, okay.
I looked it up.
So that means it worked out in 2017. But you know, in 2017, which seems like a whole different world, one of the problems that was being identified and spoken about, but not always in a way that could be listened to, was about respecting people's expertise, and especially across a gender line. So that was 2017 was the year of a lot of mansplaining being called out. Lindy always made the good point, though. It's just splaining, right? Whenever you are jumping in and trying to assert expertise in a place where you don't know what the other person knows, you've already pulled a power maneuver that is inimical to conversation, listening, and attention. And one of the ways that we wanted to stage our conversation was through writing letters back and forth. Because you have to listen that way. There's no cutting each other off. There's just a back and a forth and attending to. And we wanted to just think about what ways that we could use to model curiosity, respect, and a back and a forth, so that we could be anchored in our own discipline or expertise. Sure, I mean, that's where our training comes from. But then how do we create a middle space where some learning kind of happens? And the other thing that we didn't shy away from is to bring in the personal. We both had a lot going on with our families, and if you read the book, you can see a lot of that was part of our thinking through. So I would say it's don't be afraid of new forms, and don't be afraid to explore things. That particular book has different modalities of interchange in it, and that was really important. The other thing that I've learned a lot as a leader is don't envy not having a place at the table, because places at tables are overrated. You can beg your way into them, and then you'll be very uncomfortable once you're seated. It's better to build your own table, build a better table, set it with the kinds of things that you want to welcome people with, and the community you welcome will be far superior than the community that you have to beg your way into. That's probably not the kind of space. So create things, create them together, and create them with an open welcome. I think that really helps too. And you know, in the grand scheme of things, for collaboration across disciplines, it really is about commonalities, common humanity. You know, I love the foregrounding of what are the important questions, and then how do we answer them. We need every discipline to answer the most important questions. But also being human. So you know, like Lindy and I have known each other for a long time. Our families have known each other enough where we have a whole secret vocabulary based on humor
And snarky.
and like a snarkiness that we hope is cute rather than
cute to us.
annoying. Cute to us.
Yeah.
No, but you have to be able to you have to have a light touch where a light touch is required. Or you have to be able to laugh at certain things in order to get to the important things. The work that most of us as academics do is really serious and really necessary. But in order to carry that weight, you also need a levity that's going to enable you to be in a congregation and get some work done and put a little resistance down too. So having a sense of humor, I think, is really essential as well.
I love that.
I love that so much. And actually, some of my most valued relationships are with collaborators, because you realize that all of a sudden, yeah, you've been meeting maybe once a month or twice a month, but over 5 years,
Yeah.
you just go through a lot of life together.
Right.
And that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing.
It is.
So now I'm going to go off script a little bit. Based on what you've shared, I thought that was so beautiful. Also, I think discipline splaining is now going to be like part of my life. When you go to these no discipline splaining, or just splaining at all. So how would you see the reward structure actually helping to create some of these collaborations? Because what I heard you both say is that a lot of it was based on having this, very deep long-term relationship that led to collaborating over time. Are there ways to either just foster those relationships, no expectations of a collaboration, then see what develops over time? Or do you think that there are ways to accelerate that and to create structures that can bring people together who might not otherwise, be neighbors or talk to each other, become such friends?
I don't know that there's a kind of universal answer to that.
Yeah.
I think there are lots of different strategies. Even in this particular one, though Lindy and I lived in the same city, we didn't know each other, and it was a friend of ours, a medievalist from MIT. Lindy had just moved from MIT to Washington, D.C., connected us because he knew I was doing a big project on stones and the imagination. Lindy is a planetary scientist, knows a lot about geology and rocks, and she takes a different tack than I would. But he thought, because he knew us both, that we had personalities that might intersect, and so that kind of matchmaking is something I learned a lot from.
Yeah,
and as dean, I try to matchmake all the time and get people to connect. So I think part of it is just strategically knowing who the congenial souls are and trying to get them together and see what happens without expectations.
Yeah, and a couple things that I think about a lot from leadership positions is the concept that organizations are a fiction, and the only thing that actually exists is dyadic relationships between two people. And so you network them together and you form a team. You think about, I've worked at this university for 15 years and I'm loyal and they owe me something. Well, there is no they. It's just, did you have a relationship with the person who happens to still be provost and will be grateful for what you did? Or are they gone and now you don't know anybody? And so it's all about the dyads. And so when I was director of the School of Earth and Space Exploration at ASU, I would offer opportunities to come together and brainstorm kind of like the way I was just describing or earlier precursors of it. But I would always say, if you're the kind of scholar who would really like to stick in your lane with what you're doing, if you're, an abstract mathematician and it's you and the whiteboard and you don't want anybody, that's great. You are highly valued. You're equally valued to these other people. Here's another opportunity.
Yeah,
to
please
do
don't come to
something
my event.
different.
You won't
Right.
have fun.
By the way, you won't have fun.
Yeah.
You're so welcome to come.
You
But
can
if
come,
you
but you
choose
won't have
not to, if you choose not to, there's no value based on choosing to or not to. But to give the opportunity to think bigger and make teams. And I would say the other thing that I think enables collaboration, which goes right along with laughing. I always figure things are going well on the mission if I'm hearing laughter in the meetings, then I know that we're good, because that either means that things really suck but we can laugh about it, or that things are okay and we're laughing. Like either way, that's good. Is team culture and actually setting team norms. And this is something that I don't know how each of you experience this in your own cultures, but it's something that I've found in the tech world. People can be extremely resistant to talking about team culture and team norms. I have this hypothesis that the more at right angles you perceive human behavior to be from the product that you're creating, like a spacecraft, the less likely you're going to be to do it. to want to do it. Whereas people who do things like LARPing or theater are generally much more into doing team norms because they know it's how people interrelate that makes the work. But it's true everywhere forever, that there's the task you're doing and then there's how you do the task. And it's how you do the task that determines success. And so I figured out ways that I think generally work to get science and tech teams to set norms by calling on social science and basically bludgeoning with data. And I'll just say very, very briefly, there's one paper that I always cite, which is it's an Israeli medical study from 2015 where they set up something like 20 simulated neonatal intensive care teams. And everyone on the teams knew it was a simulation, but they were each given some sort of case study. And half of them were given polite leaders, and half of them were given leaders that were rude in a way that we would all recognize. Like, I don't know if you guys would have made it where I was trained, kind of crap that we've always heard. And they found that the minute the leader was rude, communication stopped because it was no longer safe to ask questions or offer information. And the result was that misdiagnoses and mistreatments so bad that it would have resulted in the death of the patient were the result of those small leadership rudenesses. And then follow-on studies discovered it doesn't matter who's rude. Even if it's the patient being rude, communication stops and treatment plummets. And so if you just take that example and tell your team and say, apply that to what we're trying to do here, it can help people behave better.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I'm actually a huge fan of Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, and I tell people, I'm like, if you wonder how it happens that surgeons operate on the wrong limb, and there's 10 people in the room who all see it happening, and no one says anything, even though this is going to have life-altering, horrible consequences for another human being.
Or fly airplanes into mountains. That happens because people are afraid to speak up too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the original guy, Phelps, who did the psychological safety studies, it's so amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ways you can counter out a single bad apple without becoming a leader simply by signaling togetherness.
Yeah. Now, do you see growing buy-in? Because something, to your point of the more you think in kind of facts or knowledge, sometimes it's less natural to bring team culture into the discussion.
Yeah.
But I'll say that in our, we're a chemistry department who's focusing on culture first, and excellence will come out of that.
Amazing. I'm going to hear your story.
Okay, well, we'll talk later. But it at first, it seemed like there was some resistance to it. But as people see it working, then there's more and more buy-in. So is that something that you see in these teams, that you can get that positive feedback cycle?
Yeah. If I could just answer briefly, I'm going to be explaining. Cutting my friend out. First of all, I think that it takes a certain amount of buy-in from everybody in the team, and then it takes a certain amount of leadership activity. So if I have somebody who's just constantly really a problem, I will absolutely step aside with them and have a conversation about that. Or my favorite topic recently is passive aggressiveness, the worst. And so I have ways to talk to people privately about passive aggression. I even have little essays I can send them about it. And I will just say, I wrote these essays on Medium. And
crucial conversations under your door.
Where did this come from? I don't know. I happen to have written it. I don't know why I'm sending it to you, but just in case. But just,
someone in your life who might need to read this.
That's right. You might know. Yeah. And I would just add briefly that one of the huge crises we went through on Psyche Mission is that we were not actually ready for our launch date, and we had to slip our launch date by a year, which was a $170 million problem. Wow. And so and could easily have ended in the cancellation of the project and the end of the next 15 years of, say, 500 people's jobs. And so it was very, very high stress. Why did that happen? I mean, there was a lot of reasons, building the spacecraft entirely during COVID and lots of things that are kind of existential, but the proximate reason was that one small team of about 6 people working on the flight software had been telling their leadership, we're not going to make it. And the leadership had been saying to the next level, we're in trouble, but we're watching the metrics. And then that person would say to the next level, I think we're going to make it. And then that's what would come up to us. So we did not know in time to help them. And so even though the motto of our mission is the best news is bad news brought early enough to fix it, so that everyone gets rewarded, that was a failure of culture that led to a $170 million price tag. And so once the whole team understood that, because we talked about it really openly, I think it helped. Yeah.
Can I say related to that too, a lesson I learned early on in being dean is I always believe that the first place to start with in leadership is putting good things out there, and not in the expectation of return, but just having that as an affect. And good things will often follow from it. But also, being acknowledging those who do the work. And for me, one of the things I've always seen as a leader, it's staff, right? Faculty and students would not be able to get where they are without staff. And the first time when I became dean, one of the first things I did was to have a staff thank you lunch. Just called everyone together. I have about 80 to 100 staff across the various units that report. And I went into the room, and I knew some of them already because I try hard to get to know people, but it was just like the vibe was off. And when I went up just to say my really quick thank yous, which I did, thank you. None of us would be able to get anything done without all of you. I'm just, this lunch is for no other reason to say thanks for your hard work, and I'm looking forward to working with you. And then I just go down to sit and eat with everyone, and the business assistant in the English department just took me aside and said, "Is that really it?" And I said, "Well, what more is there?" And she said, "Well, we thought you called us together because there's a pay cut, there's a cut back in." I'm just like, oh my God. If that is the frame that we're working in, that people get gathered for terrible announcements to be made, and we've gone badly wrong. And she helped me to identify that there actually was a climate that needed to be altered, where belonging had to start from the beginning, we had to start building things up. And Lindy, one of the things I like about your team leadership style is everybody matters, including staff. Sometimes your best idea, especially stuff like some of the best ideas that I've been able to enact as dean, have come from staff. And they know that if they bring it forward, it's going to be listened to. And that helps everyone to feel like they're part of one community that has some common goals.
I love that so much. Yeah, in our department we have the same, that we are all colleagues. Yes. We have different job duties, but we're all colleagues, and when an email goes out, whether it's to students or staff or faculty or anyone, it's always just your colleagues, because we're all colleagues. And so I will say, I think you've inspired people to think about forming new teams, because the great thing about leading a team is you get to set the culture on that team, and that's incredibly rewarding. I wanted to kind of pivot to the opposite end of the spectrum too, because you've given such brilliant advice for leaders and the people who are far along in gathering the teams. And ask, what advice would you give to someone, maybe especially an early career faculty member or someone who's new to the university, who really has a passion for interdisciplinary collaboration, but isn't quite sure how to go about getting out there and making that happen? What advice would you give them for getting started?
No, you go first.
I mean, that one's hard because it has to be modulated by you want to think of their long-term success. And if it's a recently arrived junior faculty member, job one is to get a permanent job, and everything you can do to support them into getting that permanent job is what you have to do.
That's or newly tenured.
For a newly tenured, then, welcome to the next stage of your life, right? Where freedom is opening up in front of you. You've earned something, don't waste it. But also don't limit yourself. And usually the conversation I have with people right before they come up with tenure is to do planning for what comes next. I mean, for those of us who've gone through the tenure process, there really is this thing called post-tenure depression, where you get tenured and you're like, that's it. I get to lead a new service. I get to be on a committee. Yay! Like you work so hard for something that you want to feel a sense of it mattered, but I think what you really learn is it matters to the degree that you make it matter and that you do something with this job security that is so rare in the United States, and you actually go forward with it and activate some of your potentials, and that's actually going to keep you connected, right? That will keep you from feeling like you're in a funk or disappointed, because you'll be connected with new people and build your community. So it's really steering faculty toward the tools that they need in order to do that, and getting them to think large. And maybe the one other thing I'll say too is that unfortunately we often teach junior faculty that service is the enemy of progress. Like, minimize your service because it gets in the way of the rest of anything you can do. It's actually not a great ethos, because satisfying service should be part of what we embrace, and it leads our universities forward.
Well, and I think to the point you just made, and then I'd love to hear from you, Lindy, is that maybe it's like choose your service selectively, right? That if you can be, it's through a lot of service is one of the few times you're going to meet people outside of your little bubble on campus and meet people in other departments and learn about what they do and build that network for when you do get tenure and want to do interesting things.
So right.
Yeah.
I would add some advice that a guy who was a senior partner at one of the big consulting firms told me once that I really think everyone should live by, and that is that every single person is a leader. And you don't need any followers or direct reports to be a leader. That makes you a manager. That's a whole different skill set, right? But every single person is a leader if they have a vision. And so every single one of us can create the world that we want to live in through our actions and the way that we treat other people. And so by creating that, by knowing your values and deciding what you're trying to do, even if it's just you can only decide up to next week, you might not know your 5-year plan or whatever, but if you have a plan for today, that's a good start. And a way that you will find those other people who are like-minded and who give you that sense of joy and bring out your flow so you can do interdisciplinary work. I think that that's the most important thing, and particularly in the world that we're in today, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, I don't think anybody's very happy, and I don't think anybody felt like, how did we get here, and could I have done something differently? But what we can do is change our immediate world right now, every day, and so that's what I think people should do.
I love that. So do you see any particular areas that you just think are incredibly ripe for collaborations between sciences and humanities?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you mentioned kind of where we are in the world,
Yeah.
and so I think that certainly spurs a lot of interesting directions. But where are the opportunities where you say, oh my goodness, I can't believe people haven't come together to work on this together yet from across the humanities, sciences, natural sciences, social sciences?
I have a little answer to that, but do you have an answer? Do you want to go?
I think a lot of the answers I've learned from what has been going on at ASU in the time that we've been there together. So Interplanetary Initiative, of which I'm a member, has been a great thinking space for how you build futures that everybody's involved in. Really, really great. And it's led to me working with things like the design school when they, I wrote a book on Noah's Ark and its long history, but designing Noah's Ark is the same thing as designing a spaceship for interstellar travel. You have to transport bodies across a place where they can't survive, like same problematic questions and the same ethical issues embedded in it. So just like being in a place where scientists and ethicists and designers can all work together, but all have something to say to it, I find that very enlivening. I would also say, too, the other thing that you want to disallow is competition for authority of voice, because that will bring you nowhere. So finding best ways forward where, one discipline isn't frosting on the substantial cake, or one isn't, it really has to be co-creation, otherwise it just doesn't have a sturdiness to it.
Finding leaders who actually take joy in other people's successes, which is also not the way A+ academics are brought up. That's a hard one. What's the term, somebody here knows it, for that? It's depression after tenure is is an example of it. It's like the fallacy of reward or something like that. That if all you want is a specific reward, you want to win a prize or you have a goal, you have approximately 15 seconds of happiness, and then you have meaningless again. And so trying to place our values somewhere other than just that moment, I think, is key. So the place that I see opportunity has less to do with topic and more to do with scale. I've become very suspicious of scale, as I think fundamentally we humans like best to live in a village-sized group of people, where we can really create those dyads, feel valued, have our work seen, know some large percentage of the people who are on our team. And I think that a lot of the distrust that people have in public about academia has to do with distance. Who are we? What are we doing? Why would we ever have any of these resources when I don't see any of the results? So I feel like the sweet spot for us is interdisciplinary work that is local. So let's fix the social and pollution problems in this part of this town. Let's get local and make change that makes a difference. And in those projects, there'll be need for many disciplines. and many relationships. That's where I feel like we could really do some good.
I love that you mentioned local, because one of the other things I was going to ask you about is kind of that distance, navigating distance, because ASU has such a very, very large, probably one of the biggest online education portfolios of any R1 university out there. And I know that's probably mostly the students, but are there ways in which you see that online interaction being successful that we can take advantage of, maybe still in a local way, but to bring together small teams, but online as opposed to relying on in-person interactions?
I have an answer to that.
Yeah, you must go.
So I think about this a lot. So I am at a university that is about access, and our online is completely integrated into our in-person. So it's the same professors, it's the same classes, it's the same course outcomes. And our on-campus,
give a sense of this. This like 100,000 students online, or 50,000?
We have a total of 158,000 students.
Wow.
We're getting up to close to half of those being online at this point.
50,000.
Yeah, and for me with humanities majors, it's about 50-50. But
I think just letting 158,000 students sink in at WashU is really impressive, to think about doing things at that scale, but still reaching that local personal touch that you're talking about.
I think Lindy mentioning the village, so you find ways to personalize it, and you find ways to tell smaller stories within the larger story. I always remind myself that our online students want everything that our immersion students want. They want to study abroad, they want internships, they want jobs, they want clubs, they want a president. They want everything.
Yes.
Once you know that, and you give them everything, then you learn their stories. So, I support a research project where many of them can go to Scotland and go into an archive and dig in deep and come back with stories. I work close mentoring with so many of our students who are online are native students. It's not imaginable to leave their reservation, leave their community, to come to campus. We've made them do that. They'd never get a degree.
Right.
But they do like to come to campus every now and then. So sponsoring special days when they can come, just getting that connection and making it more of the village size, so that when they see you and you see them, there's that connection and feeling of belonging is really important. So I actually do think belonging can work at scale.
Yeah.
You just have to be careful about how you personalize it.
I think that's the biggest message, what Jeffrey said, and I could just give an anecdote from my own little corner of this. I've never taught a giant course. In Interplanetary Initiative, we have the opportunity to create a new undergraduate major that we call Technological Leadership. And it's all about how to learn and be a citizen in the information age. What all the information is there. What do you do with it? And so I've taught completely asynchronous, 100% student-driven inquiry courses online, which is my passion. Inquiry classes where the class decides on a giant question to pursue and then learns how to pursue it. That's been my passion. And I would just say that doing it on a personal level is what it takes, and so you get to know every student. And then the other part that I think really helps is someone earlier today was talking about purpose and meaning, and I think that that's what every person wants. I agree with I forget who said that, maybe several people. You said that. Chris said that. And I feel like that's something that we need to give to our students too, and what goes along with purpose and meaning is to be a bit self-defined. And so to let them tell me, this is what I really need to learn about. And so we teach them the art of asking what we call the natural next question. What's the little question that comes naturally to you next in your learning process? Because the key thing that we've learned is that the way that each of us teaches after knowing a discipline for many years is almost never the order of inquiry of a person who's trying to learn it from the first time. And we've done this experimentally. And after several steps of questions, we're already saying, no, that's not the way. They should have asked this other question. That is not the authentic path of the learner. And so allowing the learners to sometimes take their authentic path and have that agency is a good addition.
And these classes are actually excellent places for collaboration. So whether you're teaching live or whether you're doing it online, the idea of, for example, a shared Canvas shell seems so alien to so many faculty because they feel like they own their course. I love the courses I've been able to teach with a shared shell, and often it's been designed by several people. You get it, now you're in there with other people. But just like it makes you realize that expertise is distributed, and it's great to have great minds thinking together to create a course that you can work with and not think like everything's you and everything starts from the beginning.
Yeah.
Just you.
Yeah, just to add on to that, the many things we do in the classroom that are never useful in later life and in fact antithetical to later life. One of them is sitting in a group where one person, the instructor, knows everything and everyone else doesn't. And where every question from the instructor is actually a test because they personally already know the answer. In real life, if you know the answer, you say the answer. And so trying to model that in the classroom feels important. Yeah.
I love that. And I want to pull on that thread with my last question before we turn over to the audience for questions, which is, I think what you were just talking about of thinking about the ways that a new learner is approaching a topic. And that seems to be so important but often overlooked in interdisciplinary collaborations, right? Because we each come into it.
We're all new learners. Yes.
We're all new learners in
That's
the
so
other
true.
discipline that we're going into. And I was curious if you have thoughts on how we could reshape those initial dialogues of interdisciplinary collaborations to kind of bring each other along as new learners in each other's fields, rather than just we're used to walking into a room of experts in our field and you just go. But what would you see changing in order to take that more pedagogical approach in our teams?
Can I give a quick answer
Yeah,
and
yeah,
turn
yeah.
it over to you for the more thorough answer? Just one practice that we do on Psyche team. Traditionally on spacecraft teams, you have science team meetings, and then everyone else on the project, engineers, business, schedulers, socials, artists, we have artists on our project, they all don't come to this meeting. Instead, we have all team meetings where everyone on the team is invited, and we mix up the topics all through the day. So it's not like we have a science block, engineering block, outreach block, it's all mixed up. And the thing that answers your really great question was invented by this colleague of mine, Tim McCoy at Smithsonian. So we called them Tim Talks. and the idea is that each of us gives 5 or 10 minute primers on our field so that everyone else can follow what comes next. And we record them. And now we have a library of primers for all the different topics that everyone on the team can watch.
I love that too. It's so great. One of the things that I've tried really hard for learning opportunities for large communities is to never have an expert come in and talk about what they're doing, but to always do it like this as a conversation where things can naturally flow, to the point where I found myself incredibly bored by keynote addresses.
Yes.
Here is everything I know, to the point where I signed up for one in April. I'm in such intellectual, I can't talk for 45 minutes. I'll die of boredom up there. But I do really think that if you get the right people together, you have a good moderator, and you watch the learning across disciplinary differences unfold, where people, just kind of probe around, curiosity, generosity, generate something that has a lasting impact on the room. It doesn't matter what the skill is. If even 15 people leave that room thinking, I have a better way of doing this, then that's huge
Modeling
success.
dialogue, I love that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, one of the terrible ironies I saw once, I won't say worse because there's far worse, but it was like a 50-minute lecture on active learning in the classroom. That's so funny. Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, we could then listen to you for 50 minutes talk about how to engage our students.
And then the irony was lost on the person. Just like, okay, that's where we need our reset. Yep.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Academic.
I don't think I realized it till about 30 minutes into it. I was like, wait a sec.
Wait a minute, I'm bored. Why is that?
Why is that? Well, if I just had like a chance to share and talk to people around me about what I'm learning. But well, with that, maybe we'll open up to the audience for questions for Jeffrey and Lindy.
I have a question, if that's okay. So I have 2 questions, really. So the first one is our students, right? So some of this cross-disciplinary collaboration in research is great, but how do we kind of, Jeffrey, you mentioned earlier this morning one of the kind of measures that you designed. So how do we, and there are some things like this going on at WashU. We have this great Beyond Boundaries, and we do team teaching, but they tend to be kind of within our wider, the humanities. So how do you get past some of the silos to kind of do that kind of thing for our students, right? Which speaks much more to their kind of real world, how the real world is structured. And I guess the second question is about hierarchy. So we've talked about disciplinary and collaboration across disciplines, but how do we, and you talked about your staff lunch, one of the things that frustrates me at universities is the kind of embedded hierarchies or very visible hierarchies, and how we kind of often say, we want to get everyone in the room, we want to hear from our staff, we want to hear from our teaching track faculty, we want to hear from our faculty that are on the tenure track, but oftentimes that becomes a very hierarchized space. So a lot of the things that you were saying, both saying were making me think about that kind of dismantling hierarchies, and so I'd love to hear some kind of thoughts on both of those things, which I realize have no connection really between each other.
Well, I can answer the disciplinary one because that's one I think about a lot. Disciplinary silos mean nothing to our students,
right?
And it's our fault for keeping them in place and keeping our students from moving. Our students are naturally very curious, and they will roam around to the degree that we let them roam around. But if we're insisting, here's your major map, here's your little places for freedom, but I'm sorry, this is, then, we stuck them in place. And I think part of it is agreeing to work with our friends and colleagues who are willing to think with us to come up with new kinds of disciplinary maps that can steer students toward the things that they want to study, and be very open to that. Another thing many universities could do is they make it incredibly difficult to double major in a minor. I mean, there's no reason for those, a lot of what we enforce. Students naturally want to be curious and to follow their questions through. We inherited such a disciplinary structure that we've had trouble saying it. Maybe we could loosen it a little bit. I think that's just hard on our own identity.
Our identity.
Yeah.
Oh, I could add another bit of this process of putting together interdisciplinary teams that I was mentioning. We call it the big questions process. And when we bring together the people to do the brainstorming, everyone is invited. And in fact, the motto of Interplanetary, we have a second motto for Interplanetary Initiative, which is, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Translated into Latin by Jeffrey.
It has to be in Latin, otherwise it doesn't sound so great.
But our first motto was, everyone is invited all the time.
Yeah.
And so when we brainstorm what the big questions are we need to answer, the first time I did it, we had, I kind of invited everybody I could find across the university and sent out emails and said, send them again. We got about 50 people in the room. There were deans, there were faculty, graduate students, undergraduates. There were members of private corporations from nearby, and some members of the community who had no particular job function that naturally linked to them except for interest. And the concept that we were running with was, every human in this room has something to contribute. So if you have a big question, we'll write it down and then we'll vote on it. And then anyone who's interested can volunteer into their teams and explain what they have to offer. And so when that very first time that we did it back in 2017, I think we ended up with 4 or 5 teams. One team was reported out on by a senior faculty member, and the next one was reported out on by a first semester freshman. And I don't think members of the community happened to have reported out, but there was something about level setting that way from the beginning that really helped.
Now, can I ask, because something that's unique and different about your campus compared to ours is that you actually break down some of those silos architecturally, at least, by having buildings that have people from all different departments in them. Whereas, when you walked in this building, right, it said English, and if you walk over to my building, it says chemistry, and there's others that say biology and political science or whatever. How important or impactful do you think that sort of architectural commingling of people in physical spaces?
Oh, it's really important. I love the model that we have of bringing people together across disciplines and hoping that in the break room, in the cafe, that they're just going to run into each other, and it makes a huge difference. For me, I have 3 interdisciplinary schools. 2 of them have their own buildings, and one gathers 7 programs, one gathers 20 languages. It's nice because they see each other all the time. My favorite building on campus, though, is actually your original building. I don't think you've been there for a while, but it's called ISTB 7. It's where planetary...
4.
ISTB 4, sorry. I know we're up to 7 already.
Interdisciplinary Science and Technology Building 4. Is that right?
Yes, and it has everything from meteorites in it to a Triceratops skull to the Mars rover, and kids are always coming through. There's such a space of learning, but it's got people from every college in it too.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, and I think there's always a frustration. So that school, the School of Earth and Space Exploration, I was director for 5 years, spread across 10 buildings, and it made people crazy because the faculty meeting was always here, and other people had to walk a long way, and it was 115 degrees, and all those kinds of things, like the emails that we can just imagine flying around. I feel like the biggest thing about that, which may or may not be executable elsewhere, was glass-walled laboratories and working spaces, so that when you're walking around, you can see the people behind the walls and begin to imagine what they're doing, even if it's just a conference room. I feel like the glass walls are even more important than mixing people.
Like
Yeah.
that.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really good. I think that my chemistry host took me on a tour of IST
Yeah.
before when I came up.
The ground floor.
I just remember being like
It's a
museum.
public
It was really
museum,
neat, yeah.
and we actually bring 9,000 K through 12 students through every
Yeah.
year.
But I noticed all the different departments that were represented. I just thought that was really
Yeah.
unique. Yeah.
Lots of fun.
Other questions?
In the back also. It's been
Yeah.
meeting.
Oh, we'll start in the back and then work our way forward. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm Corinna Tritel. I'm a historian who really enjoys interdisciplinary work. I wonder if you could talk about the humanities piece of this. The incentive structures in the humanities aren't always friendly to interdisciplinary work. It's difficult to get grants that support interdisciplinary scholarship. There aren't that many. One of them may be gone. Co-teaching is not always viewed as desirable or rewarded in the dean's office. The kinds of opportunity, incentive, like what are the incentive structures that you know of in your own experience that can really help humanists do interdisciplinary collaboration, either in the humanities or between the humanities and natural or social sciences?
It always shocks me that team teaching winds up being an impediment in so many places. And most of the time it's because people imagine it's an impediment, but there is no break on it. It's just kind of internalized. It's tough, it's hard, but there are some places that seem genuinely not to want to do it. I don't get it in that I've spent a lot of my life team teaching. Team teaching is the hardest thing you could ever do. It's not 2 for the price of 1. I mean, it's really like, it is a learning experience for all involved. And I personally, as dean, whenever anybody can propose a team taught course, I'm all in for it. I feel like our students deserve it. There are certain impediments that don't need to be in the way and that are in the way. When it comes to funding, funding is always a challenge. I do a lot of work in fundraising, especially philanthropic fundraising that can seed faculty projects that can be interdisciplinary and bold. For example, Arizona has an arboretum about an hour south of us that happens to be near one of the very few historically black towns nearby. It's called Randolph. So we work with both the Arboretum and the town of Randolph and its population to talk about diverse histories of Arizona migration and what that looks like, and then send different people to different places and create things. But the Arboretum is the primary supporter of it. It took me finding that there were some people of means that could actually enable this. I guess that's a long way of saying we use every strategy that we can come up with and try them out. Some work well, some don't. But partly too, you have to look, it's important to have leadership that signals through their own work, hopefully, that interdisciplinary work is going to be highly valued. I do think faculty look to the research chops of their own leaders to see what are they doing, and are they leading by example, and that really does make it easier.
Yeah, you know so much more about that than I do, but I would just add that if there are university policies that make that difficult, for example, one thing I learned about, so I am moving to Berkeley July 1st, and one of the things I learned is that almost everybody in the department that I'm joining there team teaches, because team teaching counts the same as teaching a class by yourself, which I realize is there's consequences to that, but it brings to mind the fact that there are university policies that stop us from doing things that are forward-looking. And perhaps the question to ask is, what does that policy give us in terms of benefits? That is, do we still need it? Because there's such a tendency, another thing that someone said earlier today was that academics tend to come with, no is our first reaction. And so also, that's how it's done, is another first reaction.
Yeah.
And trying to get people out of those two situations. Years ago, someone told me how they had left Sun Microsystems, and it happened to be before things went south for Sun Microsystems. So it was a moment when Sun still seemed really good, and the person who was with us, like, how did you know to leave then? And he said, I had seen the organization change from a yes organization to a no organization, and then I knew it was over. And I think, and to me that has resonated through all the years. It's stuck right in the front of my brain because I think a lot of universities are no organizations. So trying to turn that around.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll say that in our context at WashU, it's such a good question because really we have so little structure that prevents us from doing that.
Yeah.
I've been to a place that was an SCH model where it's like literally to the dollar our department budget was how many students times what level times number of credits. And so then team teaching is like, how do we divide those dollars?
Yeah.
But we have the tuition treaty here, we call it. And so really for, I'd say, department
That's so
chairs.
cool.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's like, there's no barriers to there's no accounting around that.
You ask for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so really for the department chairs,
teaching a lot. We aren't. We do it. Some people do it. I've done it twice in 22 years. But, I think it does happen, but it doesn't happen as often as you would think it could because of what Jen just said, that those things don't really exist.
Also, the structure of your class can help or hinder with team teaching. I know in the sciences, oftentimes team teaching is difficult because the whole class is organized. We have 14 lectures and the 14 topics, and I like this one, and I don't want you to do that one because that one's fine. But if instead you're teaching inquiry, and everyone in the classroom is trying to answer the questions, it's great to team teach. And effortless, I will say, too.
Absolutely. And I'll just say that for department chairs and DUSs in the room, I think this is a call to us to think about how we break down those barriers and how we do that better. I look around and see quite a few chairs, maybe future chairs, DUSs, future DUSs. Cool. Well, we've got a few minutes, and I think we had 2 more questions.
So thank you both. And I'm thinking a lot about students lately and worrying for them in various ways, especially like this conversation that's happening about young people and their attention and their orientation toward their own like learning and sense of initiative and everything it's been a hard few years for young people. So wondering like and I'm in a humanistic discipline that does essays. And that's like an uphill battle increasingly. And so and that it sounds like you've both got a lot of experience teaching this like inquiry-based, project-based, leadership-oriented, like much more dynamic. I imagine, like I would guess that's much more appealing to like the undergrads increasingly. But I don't know, I'd be curious to hear your experiences, especially like what you said about universities in these broader localities and how can we serve our community, or how thinking about undergrads also as like this key constituent basically and a big part of our mandate. And so like how these different models plays out for you guys as teachers.
I would just say that having had the luxury at ASU of designing a major the way I wanted it, I have the luxury of teaching in this particular way, which for me has solved a lot of this problem. And that is, on the very first day I'll say, my goal as an educator, and in fact the biggest goal I have in my life, is that everyone would have a sense of agency, that they could see the problems around them and take steps to solve those problems. And what that takes is overcoming the learned helplessness of high school. And so I tell them, I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm hoping to help you think better and know what you know and be able to take what we call those micro-heroics. If that's not my term, it's someone else's term. So that if you see the opportunity to make a little change, or you notice that there's a problem and you can take a first step, and the knowledge that if the first step feels too hard, it's because the first step you chose is too big and choose a smaller one. You know, that's everything about education to me. And because I have the luxury of teaching my classes that way, it's easier to engage. And we do actually really work on grammar, by the way. So you probably have much more apt answers than what I have.
I mean, I think part of it is setting the emotional tone of the classroom, right? And making sure we signal to our undergraduate students that we value their presence in the fullness of their presence, and trying to wean them away from, you know, simply paying attention to a laptop or a phone, but to eyes up front. Or I always remind my students that they only at this time in their life will they have 75 minutes with the people in the room. These are the people they could know the rest of their life. Be invested in each other, listen, attend. All the things that are humanistic, right? We teach sustained attentiveness. It's something that we really need more of right now. Students ultimately, even though it can be a little painful, learn when challenged to do so about that kind of being together. When it comes to essays and writing and all that, I you know, the challenge is we live at a time when all of our students are using AI all of the time. And most of us as faculty have not caught up to that.
Yeah.
We try to prohibit it, we try to stay above it. We don't have a lot of knowledge about it for the most part, so there's something going on with our students that's creating a gulf. I'm fortunate enough to have a daughter who just turned 21. She's a student at ASU. I watch how she uses AI, the ways in which she uses it as a learning aid. It really helps me to frame, well, this must be the way all the students are doing it. So don't prohibit it, but I try to come up with the kinds of exercises that AI is not relevant for and that students can feel an investment in. And I actually like that challenge. If AI is a supplement to writing, it's got to be good for humanists, right? We should be on top of that. And AI is where science and the humanities meet. It has to be. It's such a writing-generated practice when it comes to the large language models. So it's also finding ways to use it well.
I think we've got a couple of minutes. So your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to ask, since we have the opportunity with two folks from ASU, right? About the advantages of being at a place that prides itself on being sort of this new model of the research university in the US. If you think that what's happened at the university over the past 20 years has helped you all approach these kinds of connections, collaborations, et cetera, in ways that other universities across the country have not, right? If there's some sort of comparative advantage of being at ASU.
As Lindy Lee.
That's right.
As you go to
Berkeley.
Yeah, so I'll just preface by saying I have no beef with ASU. I've been there 11 years. It's been fabulous. That's the longest I've ever stayed anywhere. I'm kind of a, I don't know, sort of change-oriented leader. I love to come in and add some things and stir things up, and then you know, move on, let someone else. That's just how I stay interested. So it's not. ASU is amazing. It's amazing. Just being encouraged all the time to be more inventive, to try to solve more problems, to try to connect more strongly with the community, try to be more relevant, is such a license to use your brain in better ways and to get out of the no mentality. And you'll have so much more to say, but I'll just add that, of course, there's ups and downs. Like, it's pretty chaotic. There's change all the time, all the time. There's Michael Crow's this idea of fountain, like, try this, do this, we got to do this, why aren't we doing this? What's your number?
Because faculty love change.
Yeah.
Right?
Because, and let me tell you what happens is, exactly, this was my other comment, I feel like working at, so I spent the first part of my career in the elite East Coast axis of traditional universities, MIT, Brown, and the Carnegie Institution for Science in Washington, D.C., the pure research organization. And then I came to this giant public rodeo in the West. And it feels to me like we're the cavalry, and we are charging across the desert as fast as we can. And the scouts are out of sight ahead, and the chuck wagon is like, I don't even know where it is, and everyone's galloping as hard as they can. And so amazing things happen, and people drop off and get left behind and confused. And I feel like it's all those things, which is kind of great, actually.
It's great until it's not great. Right, there are moments when some of our faculty feel like they would like things to be a little more settled. That's the most negative thing I can say. Here's the most positive thing. I signed up to be dean for 5 years, and I had a really nice like departure clause and everything. I'm in year 7. I'll at least do 8 years. I feel totally invested in what I'm doing. Like you, Lindy, I always thought I'd come in, do some things for a while, look for my next, move along. I should really cherish the community that I'm part of, and I feel like I've got just a little bit more to do, and then it will be in good shape for someone else to come in and say, here's all the other things that we can do that will keep things going.
It's exactly where I felt like I was.
Yeah,
right
and
there. Like, okay, I was vice president, I did these things, and now someone else should come and bring their vision. So nothing negative.
But isn't that the part that we're often missing in leadership, where somebody thinks that they've got to be in charge forever and get things their way? At a certain point, the best thing a leader can do is step down and make room for the next person. The good ideas have to come up. The one other thing I'll say that helped me, but it's too bad, right? But when I came, the dean before me had been fired. Things were really not in good shape. And I spent my first couple of years, I didn't expect to have to do this, just telling the humanities faculty that you are valued, that you really matter. It was something that I felt deeply from our president. Our president sends me about a book every month that I don't know how he reads so much.
To everybody.
Sends books, and like he recently sent me a book from Comp Lit that I should have known and have read, and he's like, I think you need to read this. I'm like, how did you know I'm so ignorant? But I like that, but everything he does shows that he values the discipline, and yet that wasn't being transmitted. So to be able to spend some time energizing the community has been really wonderful. And I feel like ASU has been a place where that was my charge, and I felt supported to do that.
That's amazing.
Awesome. Well, I think that offered 2 perfect closing thoughts. One is cherish the community we're a part of, which I think is what this day is all about, and also make room for what's next, which is the next panel. So I invite everyone to join me in thanking our panelists.